Welcome to the podcast, everyone. We've got some news to talk about that does not involve Shedeur Sanders dropping in the NFL draft. I am Jon Wilner at WilnerHotline.com. He is John Canzano at JohnCanzano.com. And we're talking about the Pac-12 signing a media rights deal for the 2025 season. So effectively, it's the Pac-2 signing a deal for 13 games for the upcoming fall. What's the headline? I guess 13 games, 9 on the CW, 2 on CBS, and 2 on ESPN. Your reaction? What do you think?
Well, I don't think they could have done better. I mean, I think you look at where they started, you look at last year, Wilner, the CW coming in. I think they know they've got a partner they can grow with the CW. They take 9 games, which is great. And, here you have 100% distribution across the country with the CW. So that's the exposure piece they talked about. And then, the surprise to me was that ESPN is involved because I was sort of under the impression that ESPN didn't have a need for inventory, but all of a sudden now you see that ESPN wants night games in the Pacific time zone, which, raised some eyebrows in the media world. And so ESPN coming in and grabbing that Cal game, ESPN coming in, getting the Houston game, moving it to a Friday. From an Oregon State standpoint, you get, on regular ESPN. This is not ESPNU. This is not ESPN2. This is not ESPN Deportes. These games are going to be on ESPN. So that's great for Oregon State. And then CBS coming in, same thing. It's just, you're talking 100% of households. This is real CBS. This won't be CBS Sportsline. An additional streaming element on Paramount that is available with the CBS games. So I think the Pac-12 couldn't have done any better. And I think it provides a bridge to their future in some ways.
Yeah, that's the big thing. We should get into that for sure. I was struck that the Apple Cup, right? That's one of the CBS games, and the other CBS game is the first of the Washington State, Oregon State matchups, and they're playing 2 this year to cut costs. So, those make a lot of sense for a network broadcast for sure. And then the CW, similar to last year with Pac-12 Enterprises handling the production. I think that's a big element to this, the broader story of what's going to happen for the next media deal.
Yeah, and people talk about the home and home series that Oregon State and Washington State are playing. I mean, part of that, it's caused because there is no scheduling partnership with a conference like the Mountain West, which they paid, out the nose for last season. So in order to get those late season dates filled, because everybody else has a conference matchup to play, they're doing the home and home. This is not unprecedented. I believe it was Liberty and New Mexico State and Liberty did this a couple of years ago. And then UConn had one in 98. It always seems to be tied to some form of realignment or expansion. And, so playing that home and home is very unusual, but, it looks like CBS was into it. And then the CW gets the other one. And so you create an additional bit of inventory for your conference. But, you and I have talked about the balance between revenue and exposure.
Yes. Yep.
Money matters, but this is an exposure deal. And, from that standpoint, it feels like a home run to me.
I think it suggests that that's what their focus is going to be for the longer term deal, right? Starting in 2026, they need a media deal for the rebuilt conference, which will have has currently 7 football playing schools. So they got to add at least 1 more. And I don't know how you can't focus on exposure for that deal, given that you're not going to catch up with the money, right? They're already 30, 40, $50 million behind the power conferences. So trading, an extra couple million and for your exposure to me doesn't make sense. So, but we'll get into that, I think, in detail in a minute. What do you think about the timing here, right? Because we both kind of thought late April was the window for the big deal, the rebuilt Pac-12 deal, not just the 2025 piece.
Yeah, it's all moving a little slower than I expected it to move, and the sources I talk with expected it to move. But some of this 25 deal was delayed by about a week. And just to get into the weeds a little bit, ESPN wanted Oregon State and Houston to move their Saturday game to a Friday night. ESPN wanted it. That's the game they were buying. They're buying a Friday night window. And so Oregon State had to turn to Houston and say, hey, can we move that game to a Friday night? Houston agreed to do it. But it took about 7 or 8 days to actually get the Cougars to sign the document. And it kind of gives you a glimpse or a peek into the world of, the academia and the university ecosystem, because I was like, get it done. DocuSign. What are we talking about here? And it caused a delay to the point where I think the Pac-12 wanted to announce maybe 7, 8 days ago. Instead, then the NFL draft happens and they go, oh, we don't want to get into that. We'll wait until after the dust settles for the draft. And so they wait for the Tuesday announcement on Tuesday morning and they get a little more buzz for it. But it kind of gives you an idea of, okay, if this is just the 25 deal and there's that kind of delay for one little piece, how complex is trying to put together a schedule involving, the potential 8-member football conference and basketball and the tentacles of that. And, oh, by the way, have they even decided, is it an 8-member conference? Is it a 9-member conference? There are just a lot of moving parts there. I think, too, you and I have talked about this, the mediation with the Mountain West. Like, how much of a role do you think that mediation is playing in the potential play right now?
Yep, that could be, too. And not only is it about the 8 versus 9 football schools, it's also about how many football games, because you've got to have a certain amount of inventory to sell to your partners. I think they've got to figure that out first. So they have to commit to a certain number of games, possibly before they know how many teams are going to be in the conference. So then you get into the possibility that they're going to have the home and home series. If they only have 8 schools, maybe they have home and home. That adds to the complication as well. I was going through the numbers. So let's just say they have 8 football schools playing 8 games each, which means that there's a home and home in there. All right. So that's 32. I think my math's right. 32 exposures plus non-conference games. Let's say 2 each. They got 48. They're going to market with 48 football games. Let's just say. How many of those are going to be, cable? How many are streaming? How many are broadcast TV? That's a big part of what they're trying to do. And then within that, all right, well, which networks are going to take it for linear and which for streaming, if at all? It just tells you how much they have to sort through. And at this point, it could be late May, maybe, before they get that final deal done.
Yeah. And I think too, Wilner, I was wondering about the optics of, if they had announced that, hey, here's the full deal, we've got it, they'd come out this week even and said, okay, here's the full deal. How do you mediate with the Mountain West while you're celebrating this deal and how great it is for you? And you're trying to plead poverty and go, hey, the 55 million's not great. And, we shouldn't be paying poaching penalties, but look at our TV deal. It's magnificent. So I think there is maybe a little strategy there in delaying. It's also possible, if I'm Fox or CBS or ESPN, and I've got a choice between buying the Mountain West or the new look Pac-12, it's a no-brainer for me. I want the new look Pac-12. And so I think, there's a lot going on here. I also thought, let's just put yourself in the shoes of UNLV. This deal gets announced, this 25 deal. I'm sure UNLV is rubbernecking right now, looking over going, gosh, that's a lot of exposure. Yep. And is that exposure going to be there in 26?
For them, in the Mountain West, right, for sure. And you're also seeing, ESPN is involved. Yeah. So no doubt. I think that the stay on the poaching penalty lawsuit and the exit penalty lawsuit, I think that stay ends somewhere around the middle of May. Now, if I remember correctly, the mediation for the Pac-2 versus Pac-10 in the fall of 2023, they probably had 6-8 sessions. It lasted several months, right? So you wonder if this mediation lasts into June, could they possibly delay the announcing the deal until then? I don't know, but it's certainly a great point and something we got to keep an eye on.
I think they want to get it right, and I think the emphasis needs to be on getting it right versus getting it soon.
Yep.
I did talk to Bob Thompson, late last night. I, reached out to him. He was watching a hockey game, and I, former retired
Yeah.
president of Fox Sports Networks, multi-time guest on this
Five.
podcast.
Five-time guest.
I asked him, I said, all right, what do you think of the partners and what do you think of the deal? And what does it mean for 26? And he said, it's likely that the partners for 25 have an option to buy into the 26 deal. They'd probably want that in the contract as they're signing on for 25. Now, does that mean the CW is going to expand and take more games? Or does it mean that the CW is just going to say, hey, all we ever had an appetite for was about 9, and we're having that this year. We'll have that next year. Does that leave room for ESPN to have a bigger presence? Is there a Pac-12 after dark element on ESPN on Fridays and Saturday nights in the Pacific time zone?
Yep.
Does Fox come in bigger? Does CBS come in bigger? It just leaves some room. But and then what do you do with basketball? Is it Turner? Is it TBS? Do they take a football game or two? But I think there's some real possibilities here. And back to the exposure piece, I'm looking at it. Washington State's got a Jimmy Rogers in his first year. They're going to get a game on CBS. They're going to be all over the CW, so the Washington State fans can see them wherever they want. Oregon State's got to be thrilled. They got to be doing cartwheels. And you have the kickoff times announced. And I don't want to get too Pollyanna here, but, there's some 7s and some 7:30s in there, of course. But at least you're not in a 6-day window. You're not in a 12-day window if you're a fan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the Friday night piece is really interesting. We've seen both with the Big 10 and the Big 12 and ACC for this coming season, the networks love that Friday night. It worked really well for the Big 10 last year, did better ratings on the whole than what Fox had on before they went to football. And I think, is it possible the Pac-12 could fill a slot on Fridays, either with ESPN or Fox, and could it fill a slot as a double header game? Let's say there's a 5 o'clock Pacific Big 10 game on Fox. Could the Pac-12 play at 8 o'clock on Friday night at home and make it a doubleheader, or something similar on ESPN with the Big 12 or ACC game? The Friday night piece could really open up some options on ESPN and Fox for the Pac-12 if they're willing to do it, and I don't know why they wouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting eyeballs. You're getting ESPN back in the room. I mean, ESPN was a long-time partner of the Pac-12 and then gone. And then I think the prevailing thought was, Wilner, that they were going to be gone for a while. And now I'm kind of going, gosh, they're back. But are they only back for a couple games here and there? Or are they back like they're going to buy every Friday and Saturday night, next season? Are they going to have 6 or 12 games? We'll see how that unfolds.
They may want options because, there were some Saturday nights this past year where it wasn't great pickings. And there was even one Saturday night where ESPN did not have a 7:30 Pacific game because there wasn't anything on the schedule, just the way the Big 12 broke down. Because currently, if BYU, Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, Stanford, and Cal, if there's a week where either they're on the road or they got buys or they're playing a day game, there's nothing available for ESPN since they don't have the Big 10 inventory. So they may want to, especially for ESPN Bet, which I think is an important piece of their business model for college football. The Boise State's pretty attractive. And for basketball, ESPN's had a long-term relationship with Gonzaga. I'm sure that they are interested in some kind of deal where they can get a few Gonzaga games.
Yeah, Teresa Gold told me in late November, she said that they weren't after who was going to pay the most money. They were after exposure, and they were after a partner. And then Gonzaga AD Chris Standiford, I visited their campus. I said, what are you looking for? He said, we're looking for a partnership. Neither one of them are talking about money. We know how important money is, but we don't have the financials on this deal, Wilner. Are we to assume that the Pac-12 traded some revenue for the exposure, or do you think the money's still mostly going to be there, but the exposure was the most important piece?
I think exposure was the most important. What do you think they got money-wise for the 2024 football deal? I was under the impression it wasn't much more than
No.
$1 million a game.
Yeah, I think $1 million a game, and I think when you look at the CW's track record, they were a discount buyer. They're new to this. They are not your primary. I don't want to use the word primary, but they don't come in and buy your whole conference. They're buying, the extra stuff. And so that's why I kind of look at the CW moving forward and I go, could they just stay with a 9-game package every year? And they just get one game, and that's their role. And that's kind of the role they fill. And I think it'll get much more interesting when you've got, an 8-team football conference or more, and it sort of gets moved around, like who's getting the ESPN games, who's getting CW. Because back in the day, what did we do? We always look at who got the Pac-12 network game, and we go, okay, that's the game nobody wanted, or that was the least desirable game. But under this new deal moving forward, that'll be really interesting. What do you think they're going to do with expansion? Do you think it'll be 1, 2, 3? What are they going to do? Are they only adding 1, 2, or 3? Or what do you think?
I think that they are very wary of diluting the brand and the competitive level of the conference. I think they're going to just add 1.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I really do. I think that once you get past that, it's diminishing returns, not only for the revenue pie and how big the slices are, but also just competitively, and they want to be the best of the non-power 4. And I think the more you add, the harder that mantle becomes to attain.
I think you look at other expansion moves in the Big Ten and the SEC, they're all no-brainer moves, right? Like you're grabbing the LA market, you're taking Oregon and Washington, you're taking Oklahoma and Texas. These are no-brainer media moves. Now, I think the Pac-12 is getting feedback from their consultant Octagon and the media partners that there isn't a no-brainer move out there. And for that reason, I agree with you. I think because of that, they're not going to make a big sweeping, we need 2 or 3 schools in Duluth. I think it's 1. And I think they get to 8. And then they try to figure out, is the better option increase our inventory by playing the home and home series? And you may, if you can look at Oregon State, Washington State, maybe as a beta, how was that received by the public when that got announced? Was it jeered at? Was it laughed at?
Right.
But you create a little more inventory by doing a home and home. Or do you go out and try to forge a scheduling partnership with another conference that is willing to play you? Or better yet, Wilner, do you knock on Sacramento State's door and say, hey, look, you're going independent. You don't have games. We'll play you. You're not a member of our conference, but we'll pick you up in a non-conference setting, but you got to play all on the road. Like, I don't know. I think there's a variety of options that are out there.
Well, if they're doing it for basketball, they'd have to knock on Shaq's door, since he's now general manager of Sacramento State.
Yeah.
Well, but that actually brings up another point. Do you think that they will add any basketball only schools?
Yeah, I've talked to St. Mary's quite a bit, and Roger Thompson, the president at St. Mary's, has been outspoken about hey, look, they're interested in having conversations with the Pac-12. They're being told right now, Wilner, hey, let us get the football part settled, and then we'll come back to you. That message has been consistent throughout the last few months. Like, the Pac-12 has not engaged with basketball-only schools trying to talk about what they want to do in basketball. They are very focused on the football piece. Then perhaps this basketball, element will be addressed at the end. And then the question is, for Teresa Gold's conference, the Pac-12, do you take a St. Mary's? Do you add them for basketball only? Do you talk to Stu Jackson of the WCC and go, hey, look, let's just do a scheduling partnership?
Yeah.
He's going to need strength of schedule with Gonzaga leaving. So it would help the WCC. Pac-12 could pick up some games. I think you do what's best for the bottom line there, don't you?
Oh, I do, for sure. And I think that at least on the football side, the trend is working against the Pac-12, just like it's working against the ACC and the Big 12 and the AAC, because the Big 10 and the SEC are talking about doing this in-season scheduling partnership, and that's going to eat up. And the SEC goes to 9 conference games. So every team in the SEC and Big 10 is going to have 3 non-conference games. One of them is going to be against each other. So that diminishes how many opportunities there are going to be either to play, guaranteed games at an SEC or Big Ten site or any kind of home and home for the ACC and the Big 12 and the Pac-12. So they have got to assume that the supply of quality non-conference games is going to shrink, I think. And so from there, you can't get the situation where you've got 7 conference games and you've got to find 5 non-conference, right? They have to have at least 8 conference games and maybe even figure out a way to do a 9th, because there's not going to be many opportunities to get the kind of teams that make it worthwhile.
I've thought about that from the Civil War standpoint and in the Apple Cup standpoint.
Yeah.
And because if the Big Ten and the SEC go to this partnership, is Oregon, or will Oregon and Washington get pressure to not play that rivalry game? Because, hey, we need that window to schedule the ACC or the SEC. And so I've thought about that. How do you think the CFP selection committee would view a home and home series if you're going to eat up some conference, windows there and say, look, everyone's going to play their rival in a home and home. Does that get looked down upon? Does it help? Is it a non-factor? You tell me.
Well, I think we have to assume that there's going to be AQs. So there's going to be one AQ spot in the CFP for the top ranked group of 5, group of 6, whatever, non-power 4, whatever you want to call it. So in theory, what you're talking about is the new Pac-12 champ in a resume showdown with the AAC champ. That is the most likely scenario. So let's just say it is Boise on one hand and Memphis, or maybe it's Washington State and Tulane. So from that standpoint, is the committee going to favor, which will the committee favor? Strength of schedule will have a lot to do with it. I think playing another intra-conference game might be better.
Yeah. I also have wondered about, would Teresa Gold in the Pac-12 and Tim Pernetti in the American, would they be willing to say, look, we are the best 2 non-power 4 conferences in the country in football. Scheduling crossover. Let's determine it. Let's settle it on the field. Which one of these conferences is better, and have a week in the early part of the season where the American and the Pac-12 crossover, play each other. Because as long as the SEC and the Big Ten are doing that, it seems to me that there would be some interest. There would be some interest in seeing which of those conferences is better.
I think so, and that's a way to get a good game, and you can arrange it so there's minimal cost with the home and home piece. And the ACC and Big 12 may do something similar in the future. So I think that's definitely a way to go. I think you could make a case, this is a different episode, that the new Pac-12 and the AAC should just merge. They should just form a giant conference with an Eastern wing and a Western wing, and figure out the details later. And that would be a better product for the future of their college football programs than being separate.
Yeah, we have heard numbers thrown around by consultants about the 2026 deal, 2026 and beyond.
Yeah,
ranging from 7 million per school per year to like 12 million maybe per school per year. And I think the Mountain West deal, and you got into this in print, the Mountain West deal is going to be significantly less than that because you've got a diminished conference. How big is that disparity going to be in your mind from those revenue distributions in the Mountain West compared to the Pac-12?
I think it's possible the Pac-12s will be double. But in terms of that range that you mentioned, 12 high end, 7 low end, first of all, that's just the TV deal. We got to remind people because it's confusing.
Yeah.
That doesn't include postseason in football or basketball. It's just the TV deal. I think my guess is it would be slightly on the low end. I would say I put the over under at 8.5 million per school. But then again, what if they take the 8th football playing school at a discount, right? And then the other schools divide up the remaining piece. So that could bump up their annual value, right?
Yeah. And not to mention, I mean, the Pac-12 Enterprises piece of this is interesting as well.
Yeah.
That, I'm kind of wondering when they announce the dollar figure in 26, do they bake in the Pac-12 Enterprises production value, or
for sure,
to make the deal look better? I mean, because on paper, I think, that deal potentially could look a little better if that's baked in. And then you mentioned postseason revenues. I have no doubt that the Pac-12 is going to knock on the CFP's door on that look in and say, hey, look, we're a better conference now. We need more than 3.6 million in distributions. We'd like to bump that up and be closer to the Big 12 or the ACC and where they are.
And I believe that look in is after the 27 season. So there'd be 2 years of the new Pac-12 and 2 years of the new CFP before they have that look in. Those will be very, very important years.
And it's interesting to see kind of how the schools are going to try to position themselves and game the system, so to speak. Oregon State is a good example of this. They have gone all in on football. They're spending their NIL money in football. They're investing there.
Yep.
They get Malik Murphy at quarterback, $1.5 million in him. They've got a couple of tight ends. They put $500,000 into these 2 tight ends. They look great. And this schedule in 25 lines up after the first 4 games. It lines up very manageable for the Oregon State team. And they're going to get the exposure. So they're going to be on ESPN. They're going to be on CBS. They're going to be on the CW. And this is a team, Wilner, that could win 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 games. I don't think they're going to beat Oregon at Oregon, or they'll lose at Texas Tech in the 3rd week of the season. But if they can beat Cal and Fresno State to start the year, they might win 9 or 10 games. And suddenly you kind of get the idea of, oh, they're building brand. They'll be in the top 25. They'll get exposure. That's how you do it.
That is. And it stands in contrast a little bit to Washington State, don't you think?
Yes.
It does not seem to me like the Cougars are spending as much money as the Beavers. And I don't know if you saw, but ESPN on a story today, Boise State has signed Spencer Danielson to a new contract, and I think it averages $2.2 million per year. And I was just looking at some of the numbers for the rebuilt Pac-12 coaches. Danielson's going to be at the top, 2.2. Jimmy Rogers, Washington State, is second to last at like 1.5. Trent Bray's up at 2. You can already see the pecking order starting to develop in the new Pac-12, and Oregon State's at one end, Washington State's at the other.
And I think fan bases are gonna figure that out pretty quickly. And look, to Washington State's defense, they're coming off a horrendous budget situation.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
With a president who was outgoing, and Kirk Schultz, who at the end, for whatever reason, became a hardliner who said, no, sports is not going to drive the bus. Look around, it's driving the bus. And so I think there's going to have to be an awakening there. And then, obviously the new president has come in at Washington State, and maybe some more alignment between the regents and the president will help.
Maybe.
But you got 5 or 6 years here, and then there's going to be another inflection point. And so this is all about getting yourself visible, building your brand, and trying to get to the playoff.
That is what it's all about. So it's basically an audition, right? The next 5 years, 6 years, an audition. And most important thing about an audition is being seen.
That's right.
Right? Being seen, exposure, being seen.
Get that exposure. We'd love to know what you think of the Pac-12's 2025 media deal and what might happen in 2026. Tell us in the comment section, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode. You can read me at johncanzano.com. You can read Jon Wilner at wilnerhotline.com. Hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends and family, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks very much, everybody.